I am Morgan Blake, 32 years old, and a financial advisor who carved out her own success in America through years of stubborn effort. When I was 24, I started my first job at a small firm in San Diego. I was the woman who arrived before the lights turned on and left long after the cleaners had finished their rounds. 8 years of 70-hour weeks later, I had built a reputation strong enough to open my own advisory office. The numbers I managed grew from thousands to millions, and I learned how to multiply clients' money. Last winter, I rewarded myself with something no one could deny I had earned: a glass-walled penthouse in downtown Chicago. It cost $2.4 million, a figure that once would have seemed impossible, but by then felt like a crown on the years I had poured into my work. I made a six-figure down payment in cash, secured a fair mortgage, and closed the deal with my signature shaking just a little. Standing inside that penthouse the first night, with Lake Michigan stretched out like a dark mirror beneath the moonlight, I let myself cry. It wasn't only the home. It was proof that the years of rejection, late nights, and quiet sacrifices had built something solid, something no one else could claim. Of course, in my family, nothing was ever so simple. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, with my parents, Helen and Victor, and my younger brother, Ryan. In that house, the rules were unspoken but unbreakable. Ryan was the favorite. I was the worker. He got new cars, paid for by them, while I rode the bus. He was celebrated for passing classes I had aced years before, while my awards collected dust on a shelf no one glanced at. They believed Ryan deserved things, while I had to prove myself again and again. The habit stuck. Even when I earned six figures by 28, they barely noticed. But when Ryan needed rent money or tuition, their checkbooks came out without hesitation. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself my independence was worth more than their attention. Most days I believed it. Then came Ryan's wedding. It should have been a day of joy, but instead it turned into the night that changed everything. The ballroom near the Chicago River was lit like a movie set. Chandeliers glowed above gold-trimmed tables, roses spilled from crystal vases, and a string quartet played near the stage. I wore a navy silk dress I had bought myself in New York after closing a deal worth $1.8 million for a client. I had tucked a thoughtful gift for Ryan and his new wife onto the table, a set of antique silver wine goblets that had cost me almost $900. It was my way of saying, I wish you well, even if we've had our differences. But before I could return to my seat, I felt my mother's hand on my arm. She smiled for the guests, her pearls glinting under the lights, and guided me behind a curtain near the cake. My father, Victor, was waiting, his expression like carved stone. Morgan, my mother whispered, still smiling, it's time you did the right thing. I frowned. What do you mean? Give your brother the deed, she said, as if it were obvious. He needs to start married life in a proper home. That penthouse is too big for you anyway. My father folded his arms and nodded once, as if to stamp her words with authority. Something in me froze, then cracked. I had been ignored, dismissed, and overlooked, but this was different. This was theft dressed up as family duty. No, I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was racing. The penthouse is mine. I bought it. I worked for it. It's not yours to give away. The air seemed to thicken. My mother's smile vanished. My father's eyes darkened. Then it happened. My father's hand shot out faster than I could react. The slap landed across my cheek with a force that rattled my teeth. The sound echoed louder than the music for me, a crack that silenced my world. For a second, I saw the chandelier above blur as my vision swam. Gasps filled the space. I heard someone drop a glass. Ryan's voice called my name in shock. The quartet kept playing because they did not know what else to do, but the notes felt like knives in the air. My cheek burned, and I tasted blood in the corner of my mouth. I straightened, my body shaking. I looked into my father's face, searching for regret, but there was none. Only the same cold certainty that had governed my childhood. Something broke inside me that night, but in its place, something stronger formed. Without a word, I walked out of the ballroom. Guests stared. Some whispered. I did not stop. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and snapped photos of my face. My friend Paige, who had been seated near the back, rushed after me. "Morgan, oh my God," she began.
"Hospital," I said.
My voice didn't sound like mine. Paige grabbed her keys and drove me to the ER. The nurse took one look at my cheek, red and swollen, and asked gently if I wanted to press charges. I couldn't bring myself to speak. I just nodded, asked for copies of everything, and let them document what had been done. On the ride home, Paige held my hand. "You do not owe them your life," she said firmly, her voice sharp in the quiet car. "Not your money, not your house, not your peace. They've taken enough." Her words sank into me like medicine. That night, at 2 a.m., I stood in the kitchen of my penthouse with a cold spoon pressed to my cheek. The city lights stretched out across the water, glittering and alive. My body still hurt, but the weight pressing on my chest had shifted. I opened my phone, blocked my parents' numbers, and sent Ryan a single calm text. "I love you, but I am done being the family wallet." I turned off the phone, locked the door, and leaned against the counter. For the first time in my life, I felt the possibility of freedom. I had never been so hurt. I had never been so alone. And I had never in all my years felt so free. The morning after the wedding, I woke in my penthouse with a swollen cheek and a heart that felt both raw and steady. The city outside my window was beginning another day, indifferent to what had happened to me. Taxis honked, joggers ran the lakefront, and office towers lit up one by one. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of coffee and promised myself something simple: no more silence. No more pretending the rules of my family were fair. The first step was building a circle I could trust. Paige came by with soup and insisted on staying until nightfall. My college friend Lucas flew in from Boston that weekend, just to walk through my place and check every lock like a big brother I never had. "This place is yours," he said, staring out at the lake. "And no one is taking it." My cousin Claire, who lived in Boston as well, sent flowers with a note that made me cry. "Real love does not demand your keys," it read in her careful handwriting. But support from friends was not enough. I needed professional help. I found a therapist, Dr. Alvarez, whose office overlooked a quiet park in Lincoln Park. On my first visit, she listened to everything: the years of favoritism, the constant giving, the wedding slap. When I finished, she leaned forward and said words that stuck to my ribs. "If they punish you for having a door, build a better door." So we built one together, piece by piece. I started a safety file. Into it went the ER notes, the photos of my cheek, and the police incident report I had quietly filed. I added copies of my deed and mortgage, insurance papers, and even a short letter to myself reminding me why I had left that ballroom. I gave a copy to Paige for safekeeping. Then I met with Mr. Nolan, the building manager. For $350, he upgraded my door camera and added a stronger deadbolt. I gave the concierge a list of people who were not allowed up. My parents' names were at the top. Signing that paper felt both harsh and holy. While my personal life was storming, my career kept moving like a steady tide. In March, a client in New York asked me to restructure her chain of retail stores. I booked a flight, stayed in a small hotel near Bryant Park, and spent 3 long days running numbers in a quiet corner of her office. In the end, I secured a $1.8 million refinancing package that kept 30 employees on payroll. When she hugged me with tears in her eyes, I realized work was not just money. It was survival for people who trusted me. From New York, I flew to Denver, where another client asked me to update his retirement plan. We sat in a glass tower with the Rockies behind us, running projections that stretched 20 years into the future. That project, plus 2 new accounts I signed in Chicago, pushed my firm, Blake Advisory, to $6.2 million in assets under management that quarter. I allowed myself a small celebration, a raise in my own salary, and the decision to hire an assistant. That is how Naomi joined me. She was 26, bright-eyed, and had the habit of color-coding everything, even the lunch schedule. On her first day, she organized the files I had been drowning in and created a calendar system that actually made sense. She told me her favorite phrase was "order is kindness," and I decided right then that she was staying as long as she wanted. Even with the chaos, I tried to keep a little rhythm for myself. On Saturday mornings, Lucas and I walked by the lake, coffee cups in hand, talking about everything from investments to art museums. He had just taken a new job with a tech firm in London, and together we daydreamed about traveling through England one summer, tea by the Thames, a quick train to Oxford, a weekend in the Cotswolds. For the first time in months, I felt my chest loosen. I also learned the beauty of silence. My phone stayed on Do Not Disturb most evenings. Calls I did not want rolled straight to voicemail. I answered only to the voices that felt safe. Therapy became a non-negotiable part of my week. And sleep, which had been elusive for years, finally began to return in long, unbroken hours. At home, I started to rebuild my space to reflect me, not the version of me my parents would have approved of. I sold the stiff leather sofa my mother once admired and replaced it with a deep blue velvet couch for $2,100. It was wide enough to curl up on with a book, soft enough to nap on after a long day. On the walls, I hung black and white photos I had taken during old work trips, the coastline of Maine, the skyline of Seattle, the quiet arches of St. Louis. They reminded me of the places I had traveled on my own dime, of the life I had built without help. The dining area became the heart of my home. I found a long farm table from a craftsman in Michigan and polished it until it gleamed. Around it, I began to host small dinners, nothing fancy, just people who spoke softly and listened deeply. Paige came often, Lucas when he was in town, Naomi once after work. I roasted chickens with lemon and thyme, poured wine into crystal glasses, and laughed until midnight with people who knew how to love without taking. In the kitchen, I taught myself how to bake. The first chocolate tart was a disaster, the crust too hard to cut, but by the third try it was perfect, glossy, rich, and balanced with just enough salt. I began to enjoy the process of failing and trying again, something my family had never allowed me to do. Even the terrace was transformed. I filled planters with lavender, rosemary, and small tomato vines. Some mornings, I stood barefoot in the sun, touching the leaves and letting the smell of rosemary cling to my hands. It felt like proof that I could grow something new, even here, even after everything. By April, my penthouse no longer felt like a prize I had to defend. It felt like a sanctuary I had created from the inside out. The slap at the wedding had drawn a line in my life, but what came after was not just pain. It was construction, building boundaries, building safety, and building a home that finally reflected me. I did not know what my parents were saying about me. I did not care. I had stopped reading their messages long ago. What mattered was the space I was claiming, the people I was keeping close, and the quiet voice inside me that was finally growing louder. That voice said, "You are safe here. You are free here. This is the life you have earned." Spring arrived with a softness I had not felt in years. The city thawed, and as buds appeared on the trees lining Michigan Avenue, something inside me began to thaw, too. I had spent months pulling away from the chaos of my parents' demands, months fortifying my home and myself, and now I was beginning to notice light where there had only been shadows. My firm grew steadily. I signed 3 new clients from referrals, all women who told me in quiet voices that they were tired of men treating their money as a game. I listened, I explained, and I built strategies that put them back in control. At the end of one meeting, a woman hugged me so tightly I felt her heart beating against mine. "You didn't just save my retirement," she said. "You gave me back my dignity." In May, I traveled to San Francisco to lead a workshop called Boundaries and Money. Standing in a glass-walled conference room with the Bay Bridge glittering in the distance, I told a room full of strangers what I had only recently learned myself. Love that asks you to betray yourself is not love. It is a bill with no ceiling. A woman in the front row covered her face with her hands and wept. Afterward, she told me she had been funding her brother's failing business for years out of guilt. She left with a plan to stop. Someone recorded the talk and posted it online. Within days, the video had been viewed tens of thousands of times. I didn't go viral in the way influencers do, but enough people found me that I began receiving emails from across the country. A podcaster in Los Angeles invited me onto her show, and I flew out that June to record an hour-long conversation about courage, finances, and the importance of safe space. The morning after it aired, I opened my laptop to more than 200 messages. A consultant in London wrote, "We pay in pounds if that works." I smiled and typed back, "Yes, it does." My work was no longer confined to Chicago. It was stretching across oceans, touching lives I had never imagined. That same summer night, Paige and I sat on the terrace of my penthouse, the city humming below us, sipping glasses of English gin Lucas had mailed from a small shop in Soho. It had cost him about 25 pounds a bottle, and it tasted of juniper and lemon, sharp and clean. Paige asked how my face was healing. The bruise had faded, but I told her the truth. "Better," I said. "Not gone." She nodded, her eyes soft. "Wounds like that live under the skin for a while. But look at you now." Then July arrived, and with it a message from Ryan. It was short.
"I'm sorry.
I didn't know they planned that. I see it now.
Can we talk?"
I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But something in his words, the quiet admission of guilt, kept me from pressing the button. I thought about boundaries, about progress, not perfection, about the possibility of cautious connection. I wrote back with conditions. Public coffee shop.
Daytime.
No parents. He agreed. We met at a quiet place on State Street. I chose a table by the window, where the light was bright and the space felt open. When he walked in, he looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture less certain. He carried no arrogance with him, only a kind of shame. He spoke first. "Hannah and I started therapy." She saw the slap. She cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes because she couldn't believe it happened. His voice cracked. "I didn't stop it. I didn't do anything. I've been living on everything handed to me. I hate it." I folded my hands around my coffee. "I will not let them near me," I said slowly. "I wish them well, far away."
"I get it," he said.
"I don't want her home. I don't want their money. I want to grow up." We talked for an hour. About therapy, about responsibility, about the ways he wanted to change. I did not forgive him. Not yet, but I saw a flicker of something I had never seen before in him, humility. When we stood to leave, I laid down my terms. "If you want a place in my life, you earn it with time. Quite proof. No drama. No excuses." He nodded. "I understand." I walked away with my chest light and my guard still in place. It was not reconciliation. It was not forgetting. But it was the beginning of something new, cautious, careful, and maybe worth trying. That night, I decided to give myself a gift. I ordered a custom oak bookshelf from a craftswoman in Michigan. It cost $4,800, more than I had ever spent on furniture, but I wanted something solid, something built by hands that cared. 2 months later, it arrived, warm and strong, filling one wall of my living room. I unpacked the boxes of books I had collected over the years, novels, biographies, financial guides, poetry, and placed them one by one on the shelves. As the rows filled, the room took on a new gravity. It no longer looked like a space waiting for approval. It looked like mine. That bookshelf was not just furniture. It was a promise to myself. By late summer, I felt a shift in my life. My business was thriving. My home reflected me. My brother had taken the first step toward growth, even if I kept him at a cautious distance. And my parents, for the first time in my life, had no access to me at all. I would not say I was healed. Healing is not a destination, but a long road. But I could say this: I was making a life I chose. One that honored the work I had done, the boundaries I had drawn, and the person I was finally learning to be. And for the first time in years, I could sit in my penthouse as the sun set, a glass of gin in hand, and feel not just safety, but peace. Autumn came to Chicago dressed in crisp skies and brisk winds. The leaves along Michigan Avenue turned gold and scattered across sidewalks where business people hurried to work, collars turned up against the cold. From my penthouse window, The view of the lake grew sharper with the chill. I had survived the storm of my family's demands, and now I was learning to live in the calm. My firm entered its strongest quarter yet. The client base had grown from word of mouth, and by October, we managed over $7.8 million in assets. For the first time, I paid an extra $30,000 toward the principal on my mortgage. Watching the balance shrink gave me a thrill I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't only about financial security, it was about the knowledge that this home would never belong to anyone but me. To honor my past, I created a scholarship at my old community college in Oregon, aimed at first-generation students who wanted to study finance. I seeded it with $25,000, enough for several small awards. I thought about the girl I used to be, riding the bus to classes with a second-hand laptop, wondering if I would ever escape the shadow of my family. That scholarship was a letter to her across time. You will. Keep going. In November, I decided it was time to open my door again, not to those who had hurt me, but to the ones who had carried me through. I hosted a small housewarming dinner, not the grand events my parents would have demanded, but an intimate gathering filled with warmth. Paige brought flowers, deep red roses that she arranged in one of my silver vases. Lucas flew in from New York just before his move to London and insisted on cooking. He stood in my kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta with a glass of wine in hand, looking completely at ease. Naomi, my assistant, created a playlist that drifted between quiet piano pieces and old soul tracks. The air filled with laughter, candlelight flickered on the farm table, and for the first time, my penthouse felt not only safe but alive. Before dinner, I stood by the tall windows, looking out at the city that had tested me and rewarded me. I spoke words I had rehearsed silently for months. This home is mine because I earned it. My body is mine. My time is mine. My love is mine to give. The room went quiet, and then Paige lifted her glass. To Morgan, who finally took back her key. We all toasted, and I felt tears rise, not from pain but from joy. My parents never wrote to me after the wedding. They never apologized. They never asked to see me. I had expected their silence to feel like abandonment, but instead it felt like freedom. I did not wait for a knock on the door that would never come. Peace is loud at first, like a strange noise in the background, and then it becomes a steady hum, like the engine of a train carrying you forward. I kept therapy, kept my boundaries, and kept my life small and rich. Week by week, the routines deepened. Early mornings with coffee and financial reports, afternoons coaching clients through decisions that would shape their futures, evenings on the terrace wrapped in a blanket with a book. My world no longer tilted on whether my parents approved. It tilted on whether I felt safe, rested, and honest with myself. Near Thanksgiving, my brother reached out again. This time, he didn't send an apology or ask for anything. He simply texted a photo of a workbook page from his counselor, filled with notes in his own handwriting. He wrote beneath it, "Learning.
Trying."
Then another message, "Can I drop a pie at your front desk?" I stared at the words for a long time before replying.
Yes.
The desk is fine. He didn't ask to come up. He didn't push. He respected the boundary, and in that simple act, I felt the smallest seed of trust. Sometimes, grace is not letting someone all the way in, but leaving the door cracked enough for light to pass through. When the first snow came in December, I sat on my blue velvet sofa with a mug of hot cocoa and watched the flakes drift past the windows. The oak shelves were now filled with my books, the farm table bore faint wax marks from too many candles, and the terrace plants were tucked into winter pots. The space looked lived in, warm, and whole. My cheek had healed long ago, but the scar inside had reshaped me. My heart no longer bent toward pleasing those who would never see me. It stood straight, carrying the weight of a new shape. In my office, I had framed the deed to my penthouse. It hung above my desk, not as a trophy but as a reminder. I would glance at it sometimes and feel no fear, no pressure that someone would try to take it from me. I knew now that the only people who belonged in this home were the ones who knocked and waited to be invited. Here is what I have come to believe. Real family celebrates the work that builds a life. Real family respects the boundaries that keep love honest. A real family never demands that you give up yourself as the price of belonging. If you are standing in front of a doorway with a key in your hand and someone tells you that you owe them your home, your peace, or your future, let me be the voice that whispers behind you. You own no one your life. Turn the key. Step inside. Fill the room with your own taste, your own laughter, your own strength. Invite only those who clap when you win, who sit quietly with you when you hurt, who never mistake control for love. That night, as the snow continued to fall, I closed the curtains, set my empty mug in the sink, and turned off the lights. My penthouse glowed softly in the dark, a space entirely my own. The home that had almost been stolen had become the home that stayed mine, and with it, the life that finally felt like mine too.